Hello, hello, and welcome. So, similar to what I used to do, what I've been doing, I sometimes try to add a bit of discussion, a bit of what I think about certain cards, certain aspect of the game to the beginning of the stream. So that's a bit of a discussion. Again, I wouldn't call these guide or anything. It's just something that I thought of while I was playing the game, so something like that. Right. So today's topic, and I think it will stay relevant for this whole week's gameplay, at least the league gameplay, is a card called Dark Web. So what does it do? Pretty straightforward. Uh, for each card in your opponent's deck with a base power 50 more, up to a maximum of 5, your cards wherever they are with 50 or more base power gain 5 permanently. So basically means it's kind of like a comparison or a competition between you and your opponent of who has more uh, power over 50 cards, right? Like as long as you have this in your deck, and because of it's a high energy week, most people will have this in their deck. So usually that you see that opponent will also play a deck that make use of this card. So obviously I think one way to get around it is to just not have power over 50 cards. But the problem then becomes, well, you can't use up all your energy then, or you're only playing low impact card. So at the beginning of the week I played several games without Dark Web card with a low energy, low power deck, but kind of just doesn't work out. You have to find the powerful cards with high energy, and if you are playing those cards but you don't have a Dark Web and you run into an opponent who do have a Dark Web, you are gonna be behind for quite a bit. Okay, so yeah, how much value does this actually add? Why is everyone playing this card, and is it actually worth it? Well, obviously it is worth it, right? And then I will also touch a bit about at least how I understand permanent buff, and kind of like how to calculate how much does that mean, because this here it does say +5 permanently, and I think for some cards it's very easy to understand. If it's for the turn, probably the easiest, and then for the round, a bit harder but still easy. Until played, still straightforward. I think the only one that requires more calculation and more understanding, and still I'm not certain if my calculation is correct, is the permanently. Uh, at the beginning, I did some basic calculation. I remember like in previous streams I talk about a 1.8, right? 1.8 being the magic number for applying a permanent buff. My thought was that, okay, like you play this for the first time, you play this for the second time, and then you only play half of your card for the third time, right? Because it's not 6 round, there's only 5 round, and you play a total of 45 cards. So yeah, 18 plus 18 plus 9. But then the number I got was 1.8. Yeah, again, if you do the calculation, if you average everything out, you'll find that if calculated that way, uh, you get 1.8 of the basic power of the number that you see on the card, the buffing number. But the problem then, as I start to like think it further, I realize that means you have to draw this card on turn 1, right? So that if you draw this card on turn 1, you apply all those buff to your card for the first 18 cards you play. But obviously you're not gonna draw this card on turn 1 all the time. And so I did a bit more calculation. I like when I was trying to do it, I did it, I would say, like considered more detail, like considered more actual scenario in game. But I would say like the calculation that I would be using now, or at least I think will be a very good approximation. Obviously, it won't take into account some of the decision makings you do in the game, but I think it is pretty accurate. Well, at least like if I understand this thing conceptually, if I understand it correct, right? So I also did this before, but on average, you draw your card, any given card, on turn 3. Or a little bit before turn 3, like turn 2.9, 0.92 or something, but I think it's close enough to make the call that you draw your card on turn 3. So what does that mean in gameplay? Alright, so in a, again, ideal scenario where you just draw, you play, you draw, you play, not much thinking, you don't hold anything, you just draw whatever, you play whatever you draw, and so that means, again, this is assuming that this is buffing everything in your deck. Right, again, this is a theoretical calculation. I'll talk about the specific scenario in a bit, but in a theoretical calculation, so you draw this on turn 3, that means the 6 cards before that, the cards you play on turn 1 and 2 will not be buffed, and then the card you play starting from turns 3 up until turn 8, those 6 turns, 18 cards, they'll be buffed one time, and you draw this again on turn 9, and then those you play another set of 18 cards for the second time, and those cards since already been buffed once, so they'll be buffed the second time. And then in the end, you draw this on turn 15, and so it applies a buff again, and you play only 3 cards. So only 3 cards will be buffed for the third time. Alright, so basically, again, just doing some calculation, doing the average value or the expected value. You can see that for a permanent buff to be applied on a card, for a card like this, essentially you're applying the buff 1.4 times. Right, if you average everything out. Okay, so I think from now on, I think 1.4 will be the more correct number, right? Because that's, again, this will depend on the gameplay, depend on other details, but I think multiplying a permanent buff by 1.4 will give you a better idea of how the buff is like if it's just a normal one-time buff. Alright, so what does that mean for Dark Web? Right, let's talk about the exact or the practical situation, right, this specific case. In most scenarios, at least in the games I played, you'll see that your Dark Web will gain its full effect, which means opponent is indeed playing 5 or more cards with over 50 power. So I think that's pretty safe to assume. Well, obviously it's like league specific, league like this week, the energy intensive league, that's pretty safe to assume. So it buffs your 50 plus power card by 25. And if you multiply that 25 by 1.4, you get 35. So that means actually this card is buffing all of those cards that you play, all of those over 50 power card by 35. And then you can take a look at your card deck and see how many of those plus 50 power card you're actually playing. So I would say 2/3 would probably be a rough estimate, right? So I think in my AV, I'll talk more about deck in a bit, but it's pretty much the same as before, as yesterday, but it's an Aviation deck with 13, I think it's 13, with 13 plus 50 power cards. So let's say 2/3 are plus 50, and then you do the calculation, and you will find that this card will bring about 1,050 power to your deck, just by including this and just assuming like regular gameplay where you draw and you play it. Obviously, there are like another thing to consider with this. I'll talk about that in a bit. Maybe the last point I want to make like in terms of decision making, gameplay. But I would say, and this also feels right to me, at least this number is that including Dark Web in a deck with 12 over 50 power cards will gain a value of 1,050. So yeah, if one card, obviously depending on how many times you play it, like you play it once, twice, or three times, this card on average just brings that much power. So a very strong card, very powerful, no matter which way you look at it. In a week like this just brings so much power, and it's almost a must include. There might be some ways to build around it, but again, I think if you're not utilizing energy, I don't really see a way that you can really compete with the top decks, right? When other top decks are pumping out 500, 600, 700 points per turn, if you're only running your low little cards, it's probably not gonna be enough. At least that's my feeling, my understanding right now. So we know that in a whole gameplay, this card brings 1,050, but a lot of times you also want to see the per card value, right? I would say like a easy estimate would be, again, not considering too much gameplay strategy. You play a card on average 2.5 times per game, right? Again, this is a very safe average because, again, on the third round, you're only playing half of your card. So, like for a card like Dark Web, you can say you played for 2.5 times and you gain 1,050 energy. Obviously, it has its base power, right? So, if you divided 1,050 by 2.5, that's around 400, right? 420? Yeah, 420. Yeah. So, and plus its base power, it's 469. So that means this card is 8 for 469. And again, from a per card value, from a per energy value, again, energy kind of doesn't matter this week, but it's just a card that you cannot ignore, a card you cannot afford to not include. Right, that's why I mentioned I don't know how I feel about printing a card like this, right? When a card is auto include in any deck, it's almost guaranteed that it's not a good card, right? Just assume the Avid just decide to print a card where 1 energy, 10,000 power, right? Then everyone will play it and the game becomes boring, right? So yeah, that's pretty much the value calculation for this card. Again, if it shows anything, it's that you gotta include it, right? But what does it imply in actual gameplay, right? In game strategy. So one thing to take notice is that this is a draw effect, which if it like sometimes it's if it's a permanent effect or if it's affecting everything in your deck, it's better to have it be a draw effect, right? Because you don't even need to play this card to gain the effect. So I think again in a game you can draw a card up to 3 times. So let's say you draw Dark Web for the first time. You definitely still want to play it, because you know that you will draw it for the second time, and even after the second time you draw it, you will still play all of your cards or all 18 of your cards, right? So that means it will still get, obviously not as high as the first time it's drawn, but still probably at 400 or 500 of power. So even if you have to lose some tempo, even if you have to lose a round for it, obviously you don't want to lose a round for it. You want to kind of balance out. But even if you need to, I still think it's better to play it the first time you draw it, right? Because that way, in later gameplay, you will gain those power back. You will have a stronger later stage, right? Again, it's a 5 rounds game. It's 3 out of 5 rounds. So Although played by itself, it's very low tempo, but the first time you draw it, you still want to play it because you want to draw it again. Alright. Yeah, well, thank you, Killa Quill, for joining. Yeah, losing some power is something you're gonna get rewarded for. Yeah, exactly. Right, you will draw it for the second time, and again, you can do some calculation. I think most likely it will be worth it. There might be some very specific scenario that you don't want to play. You just want tempo out your opponent in the first 3 rounds, something like that. You don't want to lose any round in the first 3 rounds, but most likely you're gonna play it, right? And then I'll talk about second time later. But the third time you draw it, most likely you're not gonna play it, right? Because you already got the buff. You're not gonna draw this for the fourth time. And then this is a very low tempo card. So unless you're including this in some deck where you don't really have anything else to play, which again at this stage you're either just gonna win or just gonna lose, so it doesn't even matter. But most likely, right, you don't want to play this for the third time. And then the second time, that's a bit more complicated, right? Because first you want to decide if you want to lose a tempo, right? Say it's the last round of or it's round 3, right? It's either turn 3 round 3 or turn 2 round 3. You want to decide if you want to play this. Playing this very low tempo, you know when you get it again, you'll still have some value. So maybe from a whole game value point, this will be worth more, because even if drawn on the second last turn of the round 5 or even last turn round 5, it will still gain some value. So like it will probably still be like a 200 power card or something for playing it. But if you lose a tempo for it and you lose a round, that might be a decision you want to make, you want to think about. And then obviously if you draw this card in a, say like you're really unlucky, you draw your Dark Web first time on round 2 turn 1, and then on round 4 turn 1, that means you're not gonna draw it the third time, right? That's what it means. Because actually I can't believe I only looked up earlier today that how the card draw works in this game. There's no randomness apart from the first one. So like once you have your deck shuffled at the beginning of the game, you're basically just playing and moving those cards back to the bottom of the deck at the exact location. So right, if you draw this card late, you're not gonna draw it for the third time, and if you're not gonna draw it for the third time, pretty much there's no reason why you want to play this the second time you draw it. Because again, that's the good thing about it being a draw effect, not a play effect. That means if you draw it, you already got the value, right? So I think that's kind of the decisions you're gonna make for the second time you play it. Again, a lot of times, at least in my gameplay, like both against players and against bots, right? Bots, obviously, it's maybe like designed that way, but understanding tempo, right? Understanding when you want to win and when you want to give up, that's something definitely needs more consideration when playing, right? So that's pretty much Hello Quos, another message. I use it in literally any Tally deck from Planet X with nice space to a more classic one. Yeah, I think, like, again, you only need your opponent to have 5 cards for this to work, right? So I think that's a pretty safe bet. I think so. In a, I would say from medium to high energy week, I think this will be a very good card to include. Obviously, you will need to build your deck around it as well. I think, again, in my Evasion deck, I have 13 over 50 power, but I think as long as you have like around 12 or more than 12, I think this will be a very good card to include. Even sometimes if your opponent is only playing like 2 or 3 plus 50, I think calculating the value, it might still be worth it. Right, it might still be worth it. So yeah, that's a point I want to make on dark web. Again, I think in this week, not much of a choice. It's probably like auto include. Yeah, maybe it's possible to build a deck that's anti dark web. I tried to do it, but with the resources, with the amount of deck cards that I have, probably not gonna work. I think there might be some variation of like little, uh, the little power cards or the little energy cards. That package that might work, but definitely you need to like look through thousands of cards to find the optimal one. Right? Maybe find a lot of cards that have 49 base value or something like that to maximize things. But yeah, for this week, uh, kind of auto include, and for that reason, again, I said I don't know how I feel about this card from a design perspective.